He is innocent! I know what happened!
I have proof, Kiara said aloud, pulling a worn notebook from her jacket. And I know the law. California Family Code Section 3042 says I have the right to be heard. The courtroom fell silent mid-sentence when the little girl rose from the gallery benches. Judge Theodore Marsh's gavel had been poised to strike, his closing remarks about the weight of evidence hanging in the air like a death sentence. Every eye had been trained on Chris Walker, the black man in chains, head bowed, shoulders slumped in defeat. His court-appointed attorney had barely mounted a defense. The prosecution had painted him as a violent husband who'd snapped during a domestic dispute, driving a kitchen knife into his wife's boyfriend's throat. Then Kiara stood. Your Honor. Her voice cut through the stillness, small but unwavering. My father didn't kill anyone. The judge's weathered face contorted, his silver eyebrows knitting together in irritation. Young lady, sit down. This is not. I was there. Kiara's hands trembled at her sides, but her feet stayed planted. I saw everything that night, and my father never touched that knife. A ripple of murmurs spread through the packed courtroom. The prosecutor shot to his feet, objecting loudly. Chris's head snapped up, his eyes widening with horror and recognition as he mouthed a desperate no. But it was the woman seated 2 rows behind Kiara who went rigid. Lisa Walker, the grieving widow, whose theatrical sobs had swayed the jury for 3 days straight. Her mascara-streaked face had gone pale, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the wooden bench. Judge Marsh's lips curled into a sneer. Bailiff, remove this child from my courtroom. I have proof, Kiara said, louder now, pulling a worn notebook from her jacket. And I know the law. California Family Code Section 3042 says I have the right to be heard. If you're listening right now, please help me prove something wrong. My friend said I can't get to 5K subscribers, but I believe stories like these deserve to be heard. Help me prove to them that these stories matter. 3 months earlier, their home had seemed normal to anyone looking from the outside. The 2-story house on Maple Street, with its freshly painted shutters and manicured lawn, looked like every other family's dream. Inside, 12-year-old Kiara had learned to read the signs that others missed. She noticed when her mother started wearing perfume to run errands. She noticed the new lingerie hidden beneath sensible cotton pajamas in the dresser drawer. She noticed how Lisa's phone would buzz at odd hours, how she'd slip into the bathroom to text, emerging with flushed cheeks and a smile that never reached her eyes when she looked at Chris. Kiara said nothing. Children learned early to keep their parents' secrets, even ones that sat heavy in their chest like stones. The night it happened, Chris had been working a double shift at the warehouse. Kiara was supposed to be asleep, but the raised voices downstairs had pulled her from bed. She'd crept to the top of the stairs, her heart hammering, and peered through the banister rails. A man she'd seen before, Marcus, the friend from work her mother sometimes mentioned, stood in their kitchen. But this time there was no pretense of casual friendship. His hands gripped Lisa's waist, her arms wrapped around his neck. They kissed with the desperate hunger of people who'd been denying themselves too long. Then the front door opened. Chris stood frozen in the entryway, his work boots still muddy, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, devastation. Lisa. The word came out strangled. Marcus stepped back, hands raised. Man, look, I didn't. Get out. Chris's voice was eerily calm. Get out of my house. But Lisa moved first. Her face had transformed from shock into something cold and calculated, a mask Kiara had never seen before. She crossed to the knife block on the counter with measured steps. Chris, baby, this isn't what it looks like, she said, her fingers wrapping around a handle. Don't. Chris backed toward the door. Lisa just. She lunged. Not at Chris. At Marcus. The blade caught him in the side of the neck, and the world exploded into crimson chaos. Marcus stumbled backward, clutching at the wound, his eyes wide with disbelief. Blood sprayed across the white kitchen cabinets in arterial spurts. Kiara's scream died in her throat. Lisa stood there, the knife dripping in her hand, and then her eyes snapped upward, meeting Kiara's through the banister rails. In that moment, something passed between mother and daughter, a wordless understanding that everything was about to change. Then Lisa started screaming. Lisa's screams brought the neighbors running. By the time the first sirens wailed down Maple Street, she had transformed into the perfect victim. Mascara streaked her cheeks. Her blouse was torn at the collar, self-inflicted, Kiara would later realize, in those frantic seconds before the police arrived. The bloody knife lay on the floor near Chris's feet, exactly where Lisa had dropped it. "He tried to kill us." Lisa sobbed into the first officer's shoulder. "He came home and found Marcus here, and he lost it. Oh God, my baby was upstairs. He could have killed my baby." Chris stood silent, hands already cuffed behind his back, his eyes searching desperately for Kiara. She watched from the top of the stairs as they led him away, his protests falling on deaf ears. "I never touched him. Lisa, tell them. Lisa, please." But Lisa was busy playing her part, collapsing dramatically as the EMTs tried to check her vitals. The house became a crime scene. Police officers trampled through every room with their heavy boots and cameras, their gloved hands rifling through drawers, bagging evidence, turning their home into something unrecognizable. Yellow tape cordoned off the kitchen. Numbered markers sat beside bloodstains. Strangers invaded Kiara's sanctuary, photographing her room, questioning her in voices that pretended to be gentle but carried an edge of suspicion. "Did your daddy ever hurt you or your mama?" a detective asked, crouching to her level with patronizing concern. Kiara opened her mouth. The truth sat on her tongue, desperate to escape. Then Lisa appeared in the doorway. "Baby, tell them what happened," her mother said softly. But her eyes, God, her eyes were hard as diamonds. "Tell them how scared you were when Daddy came home angry." That night, after the police finally left, after the social worker from Child Services had asked her invasive questions about feeling safe, Lisa came to Kiara's room. She sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing her daughter's hair with the same hand that had gripped the knife. "Marcus was blackmailing me," Lisa whispered. "He was going to tell your father things, lies about me. I had to protect our family. You understand that, don't you, baby?" Kiara said nothing. Lisa's fingers tightened in her hair, just enough to hurt. "If you tell anyone what you really saw, they'll take you away from me." "Foster care, Kiara. Do you know what happens to little girls in foster care?" Her voice dropped to something venomous. "And your father? He'll die in prison. Not for murder, for failing to protect you from me. Is that what you want?" The thread hung in the darkness long after Lisa left. Kiara lay awake, staring at her ceiling, understanding with terrible clarity that she was utterly alone. The public library became Kiara's refuge. Every day after school, she'd slip through its heavy doors and disappear into the law section on the third floor, where the dust motes danced in afternoon sunlight and nobody asked questions about the 12-year-old girl buried in legal textbooks. She started with the basics. What was hearsay? What made a witness credible? Could a child testify against a parent? The words were dense, clinical, designed for adults with law degrees, but Kiara attacked them with the determination of someone with everything to lose. Her notebook filled with careful annotations. California Evidence Code Section 701, Competency of Witnesses. Family Code Section 3042, the right of a child to be heard in custody proceedings. Penal Code Section 1321, when testimony may be excluded. She copied passages verbatim, her handwriting growing tighter and more controlled as the weeks passed. At home, Lisa watched her with increasing suspicion. "What are you always writing in that little book?" "Homework," Kiara would lie, keeping her face blank. But the notebook held more than just legal research. It held evidence. She'd started documenting everything weeks before the stabbing, back when she'd first noticed the pattern. Marcus's silver Toyota appearing in their driveway every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon, always an hour after Chris left for work. She'd written down dates, times, license plate numbers. She'd noted the perfume, the new clothes, the whispered phone calls. Now she added to it methodically. She sketched the kitchen from memory, marking where everyone had stood that night. She documented Lisa's contradictions, how she told the police Chris had been drinking, when Kiara had seen him stone sober, how she'd claimed Marcus was just a co-worker, when Kiara had overheard them planning to leave together, to start over somewhere Chris would never find them. Marcus was going to expose her affair. Kiara whispered to herself in the empty library stacks, piecing it together. So she killed him first and blamed Dad. The librarian, Miss Chun, eventually noticed the small girl who arrived every afternoon and stayed until closing. She'd bring Kiara tea without asking, leave legal aid pamphlets on the table, pretend not to see when tears fell onto the pages. One evening, Miss Chun sat down across from her. You know, whatever you're researching, there are people who can help. Lawyers who work for free, advocates. I have to do this myself, Kiara said quietly. Nobody else will believe me. Miss Chun studied her for a long moment, then slid a business card across the table. Legal Aid Society. Just in case. Kiara pocketed it, but never called. She'd learned that adults protected other adults, that the system believed whoever cried loudest. She would have to be smarter than all of them. The trial began on a gray Monday morning that matched the mood inside courtroom 4B. Kiara sat in the back row, her notebook pressed against her chest like armor, watching her father shuffle and wearing an orange jumpsuit that swallowed his frame. 3 months in county jail had hollowed him out, carved shadows beneath his eyes that made him look a decade older. Judge Theodore Marsh presided with the weary disdain of a man who'd seen too many cases and believed he'd seen them all before. He barely glanced at Chris as the charges were read. First-degree murder. Assault with a deadly weapon. The words hung in the air like an execution order already signed. The prosecution moved with mechanical efficiency. Assistant District Attorney Patricia Vance was sharp-featured and sharper-tongued, her opening statement painting Chris as a textbook case of domestic violence escalated to its inevitable conclusion. A jealous husband. A crime of passion. A man who couldn't handle his wife's independence and lashed out with lethal force. She presented the evidence like a magician revealing an obvious trick. The knife with Chris's fingerprints. Of course they were there. It was his kitchen. The blood spatter pattern that proved he'd been standing near Marcus during the attack, conveniently ignoring that he'd knelt beside the dying man, trying to help. The neighbors who testified they'd heard arguing, though none could say who was arguing with whom. Chris's court-appointed attorney, a tired-looking man named Gerald Hoffman, who carried coffee-stained files and barely made eye contact, offered only the weakest defense. Ladies and gentlemen, my client maintains his innocence, but the state's case is substantial. That was it. No alternative theory. No questions about motive. No mention of Lisa's affair or Marcus's visits or the convenient timing of Chris's arrival home that night. When Chris took the stand, his voice shook. I didn't do this. I found them together and I was angry. I was hurt. But I never touched that knife. Lisa stabbed him. I tried to stop the bleeding. I called 911. Please, you have to believe me. Judge Marsh's expression never changed. He'd heard 1,000 desperate men proclaim innocence from that same witness box. Under cross-examination, Vance shredded Chris's credibility with surgical precision. Isn't it true you'd suspected your wife was cheating? Isn't it true you'd been drinking? Isn't it convenient that you're now blaming the grieving widow for your crime? No, that's not. I wasn't drinking, I never. No further questions, Your Honor. The jury's faces told Kiara everything she needed to know. They'd already decided. Her father was guilty before he'd ever walked into the courtroom. Lisa took the stand wearing a modest navy dress with a pearl necklace, her hair pulled back in a simple bun that screamed respectability. She'd lost weight since the stabbing, strategically, Kiara suspected, and the dark circles under her eyes looked genuine enough to fool anyone who hadn't watched her practice them in the bathroom mirror. The transformation was flawless. This wasn't the woman who'd kissed Marcus with desperate hunger in their kitchen. This wasn't the cold-eyed predator who'd threatened her own daughter in the darkness. This was America's victim, fragile and brave, ready to testify against the monster who destroyed her life. Mrs. Walker. Patricia Vance began gently. I know this is difficult, but can you tell the court what happened the night of September 14th? Lisa's voice trembled perfectly. Marcus was a friend from my book club. He'd stopped by to return something I'd lent him. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Chris came home early. He'd been drinking lately, stress from work, and when he saw Marcus there, he exploded. What did he do? He started yelling, accusing me of things. Lisa's voice dropped to a horrified whisper. Terrible things. Marcus tried to calm him down, tried to leave, but Chris grabbed the knife from the counter. She paused, letting a sob escape. 3 jurors leaned forward. One older woman's hand went to her chest. He stabbed Marcus right in front of me. I tried to stop him, tried to pull him away, but he was so strong, so angry. I thought. Her voice broke. I thought he was going to kill me too. I thought about our daughter upstairs and what he might do to her. The courtroom was utterly silent except for Lisa's carefully orchestrated weeping. Did your husband ever show signs of violence before? Small things, Lisa said, her voice steadier now, more confident. He'd punch walls when he was upset, break things. He scared me sometimes, but I kept hoping he'd change. For Kiara's sake. Kiara's fingernails dug into her palms hard enough to draw blood. Every word was a lie wrapped in just enough truth to be believable. Yes, Chris had punched a wall once, after his mother died. Yes, he'd broken things, a coffee mug, dropped accidentally. Gerald Hoffman's cross-examination was pathetic. Mrs. Walker, isn't it true that you and Marcus were having an affair? No. Lisa's eyes filled with fresh tears. How dare you? He was my friend. He's dead and you're trying to. Withdrawn, Hoffman muttered, defeated before he'd begun. Judge Marsh looked at the jury. Their sympathy for Lisa was written across every face. Chris's fate was sealed. Judge Marsh's gavel struck the bench like a death knell. Young lady, I will not warn you again. Bailiff. California Family Code Section 3042. Kiara's voice cut through the chaos. Stronger now. A child 12 years or older has the right to address the court in matters affecting their welfare. My father's conviction affects my welfare, Your Honor. I have relevant testimony, and I have documentation. The judge's face reddened, but Patricia Vance stood abruptly. Your Honor, if the child has relevant testimony, the state has an obligation to hear it. Due process. I know what due process is, Counselor. Marsh glared at Kiara with open hostility. You have 5 minutes, and if you waste this court's time, there will be consequences. Kiara walked to the witness stand on shaking legs. The court clerk swore her in, and she placed her notebook on the railing in front of her. Lisa's face had gone pale, but she maintained her composure, even managed a sad, encouraging smile that made Kiara's stomach turn. Mrs. Walker, Kiara began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. You testified that Marcus came to return a book club book. What book was it? Lisa blinked. It was months ago, sweetie. I don't remember. You don't remember the book that your friend died returning? Kiara opened her notebook. You also testified Marcus was just a friend, but he visited our house 17 times in the 3 months before he died. Always on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Always when Dad was at work. I documented every visit with dates and times. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Lisa's lawyer shot to his feet. Objection. This is hearsay from a child. I'm reading from contemporaneous notes, Kiara said calmly, holding up her notebook. California Evidence Code Section 1237 allows for past recollection recorded. Judge Marsh's eyebrows rose despite himself. Overruled. Continue. Kiara turned back to Lisa. You said Marcus was blackmailing you earlier. You told me that the night it happened, remember? You said he was going to tell Dad lies about you. But if he was just a friend returning a book, what would he blackmail you about? Lisa's composure cracked, just slightly. I was traumatized, confused. You also told the police Dad had been drinking that night, but the toxicology report shows 0 alcohol in his system. Why would you lie about that? I must have been mistaken. And you said Dad grabbed the knife from the counter, but the crime scene photos show the knife block on the opposite side of the kitchen from where Dad was standing. How did he get past you and Marcus to reach it? The questions came faster now, surgical and precise. Each one peeled away another layer of Lisa's carefully constructed narrative. The affair, the threats, the convenient contradictions in her testimony. Lisa's perfect mask began to slip, her answers growing desperate, contradictory. The jury was no longer looking at her with sympathy. They were looking at her with suspicion. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters lunged for their phones. Spectators broke into heated arguments. Patricia Vance stood frozen at the prosecution table, her carefully constructed case disintegrating before her eyes. Judge Marsh's gavel struck repeatedly, each blow harder than the last. Order! I will have order in this court. Lisa had abandoned all pretense now. Her face twisted with rage. The mask of the grieving widow shattered completely. She's lying. She's a child. She doesn't know what she saw. She's confused. Mrs. Walker, you will remain silent. Marsh's voice carried an edge that silenced even Lisa. He turned to Kiara, his expression unreadable. Young lady, do you have any other evidence to support these claims? Kiara produced a folded paper from her notebook. Text messages between Marcus and my mother. I copied them from her phone the week before it happened. They talk about leaving together, about money Marcus needed, about threats he made when she tried to end it. The bailiff brought the paper to the judge. Marsh read in silence, his jaw working, the muscles in his temple pulsing. When he looked up, his eyes held something dangerous, the fury of a man who'd been made a fool. Mrs. Walker, you will remain in custody pending further investigation. He gestured to the bailiff. Someone get the district attorney on the phone. Now. Lisa screamed as they led her away, her carefully styled composure dissolving into something feral. You ungrateful little bitch. After everything I've done for you, you're going to destroy your own mother. You destroyed yourself, Kiara said quietly. The proceedings dissolved into a flurry of motions and emergency conferences. Gerald Hoffman, suddenly animated with the fervor of a man who'd stumbled into redemption, filed for immediate dismissal. Patricia Vance didn't fight it, couldn't fight it, not with the evidence crumbling beneath her feet. 3 hours later, Chris Walker walked out of the courthouse a free man. He found Kiara sitting on the steps outside, her notebook clutched to her chest, looking impossibly small and impossibly brave. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, 3 months of separation and trauma hanging between them. Then Chris dropped to his knees and pulled his daughter into his arms, and they both wept. 2 months later, Judge Marsh sentenced Lisa Walker to 25 years to life for second-degree murder. He delivered the sentence with barely concealed contempt, his voice sharp as the blade she'd wielded. You didn't just kill a man, he said. You tried to destroy your family, manipulate this court, and silence your own child. The law shows you the same mercy you showed them, none. Lisa's appeals would fail. The evidence was overwhelming once anyone bothered to look. That night, Chris and Kiara sat in their kitchen, cleaned now, repainted, the blood long scrubbed away, but the memory lingering like a ghost. Kiara's notebook lay open on the table between them. You saved my life, Chris said softly. Kiara looked at her father, at the man who'd been willing to die rather than implicate her, and managed a small smile. You would have done the same for me. Outside, Maple Street looked the same as always, but inside the house with the freshly painted shutters, a 12-year-old girl had learned that sometimes justice required more than faith in the system. Sometimes it required courage to speak when everyone demanded silence.